She said, "I don't need your coat. I need your word." And he gave her both. "I." You are about to watch a story about what it costs a person to keep working after everything they loved is gone, and what it costs a stranger to show up at the door of that person in the middle of January. Stay with this one. The ending is not what you expect, and the moment it turns on is smaller than you can imagine right now. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comment. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? A coat in a snowstorm. A door that opened when it should not have. And a woman who had walked 9 miles in weather that could kill a horse, standing still, knocked on 8 doors before she knocked on his. 7 ranchers turned her away. The 8th handed her his own coat. What happened after that took the better part of a winter, and most of what was left of 2 solitary lives, and when it was over, neither of them was quite the person who had started it. That is the only kind of story worth telling. So, we go back to the beginning. His name was Cal Greer, and he had been alone on the Flint Creek property for 3 winters running. Before that, he had not been alone, but the woman he had shared the place with, his wife of 11 years, had died of a fever in late October 3 years prior. Quickly and without warning, the way fevers sometimes take a person who seemed perfectly well the morning before. Her name was Ruth. He did not speak it often. He kept it the way a man keeps a pocket knife. He no longer uses. Close, folded, not forgotten. The Flint Creek property was 460 acres of mixed grass and timber in the basin country of the High Plateau, where winter came hard in November and did not ease until late March. Cal had bought into it alongside his wife's father, a broad-shouldered, deliberate man named Elias Marsh, who had spent 30 years reading that land the way another man reads a newspaper. Elias had died the spring after Ruth, 2 years before the winter. The story turns on which Cal privately believed was less illness than intention, that Elias had simply decided the world without his daughter. He could not say he blamed the man. So Cal had 320 head of cattle, a small crew of 2, a wiry older hen named Dex, who had been with Elias since before Cal arrived, and a boy of 17 called Prentice, who worked hard and talked too much and was forgiven for the second because of the first. To see the herd through winter. He had the house, which was a good solid house, with deep walls and a stone fireplace. Elias had built himself, and he had the barn, which was better than the house, as barns often are on a serious operation. He had not simplified his life. He had narrowed it. There is a difference. Simplifying means you have made a choice about what matters. Narrowing means you have decided that choosing is itself too expensive. So you reduce the options until the only thing left is the work in front of you. And you do that work, and when it is done, you sleep. Cal Greer had been doing this for 3 years. He was good at it the way a man can be good at a thing that is quietly killing him. The winter of his 4th year. Alone came in fast and mean. By the second week of January, the temperature had dropped to places it did not usually reach until February, and a storm system had been sitting on the plateau for 4 days running, dropping snow in steady curtains that built up 1.5 feet on the flat and drifted to the eaves on the north side of the barn. Cal had lost 2 calves to the cold in the first week, which was 2 more than he could afford emotionally, if not financially, and he had been sleeping poorly, rising at 3 and 4 in the morning to check the herd, his breath making small ghosts in the lantern light as he moved through the barn. That was the landscape. That was the man. Now we come to the door. It was the 9th of January, a Thursday, somewhere between 9 and 10 in the evening, when Cal heard something at the front of the house that he first took for a branch coming down under ice weight. He had been sitting at the table eating cold beans from a pot because he had forgotten to heat them properly and had not cared enough to correct it. He set the pot down. He listened. The sound came again, less like a branch and more like a fist, weak but deliberate. He took the rifle from the rack beside the door before he opened it. Not from fear exactly, but from the kind of habit that passes for caution in a man who has lived alone long enough. He opened the door. She was standing in the snow on his porch, and she was in bad condition. Not dramatic bad, not the kind that announces itself loudly, but the quiet bad that is more frightening, the gray pallor of her face, the way she was holding herself together with both arms crossed over her chest. The fact that she was wearing a canvas work jacket that was wholly inadequate for the temperature and the wind, and the fact that she had clearly been walking in this for a very long time. She was perhaps 30 years old, or a year or two older, or younger, and she was looking at him with dark eyes that were entirely alert and entirely exhausted at once, which told him the cold had not reached her mind yet, but was working on it. He pointed the rifle at the ground. "Old instinct," she said. "I am looking for Elias Marsh." He felt the name land, the way a name lands when it belongs to the dead. "Elias Marsh has been gone near 2 years," he said. She absorbed this. She did not fold. She said he wrote me a letter. Cal stepped back from the door. He said, "Come inside." He did not think about it more than that. He had the gun angled at the porch boards, and she was going to die of cold inside of an hour if she stayed out there. And those two facts together made the calculation simple. He was not a man who required more logic than that. He got her inside and put her beside the fireplace and went and got the coat off the hook by the back door. The heavy wool one, the serious coat, not the working coat, and put it around her shoulders before she could argue, which she tried to do with her eyes before her mouth managed it. He said, "I don't want an argument. I want to know how far you walked." "From the Haskin Road," she said. "More or less." He worked the distance in his head. 9 miles. Maybe 9.5 in the straight. More, if you followed any of the drifted track. "In that jacket," he said. It was not quite a question. "I did not choose the jacket," she said. "I chose the walking." He put water on for coffee and sat down across the fire from her and let her warm. He did not interrogate her while she was still gray-faced and shaking, because that was the kind of patience Elias Marsh had modeled for him years ago, and he had taken it in without knowing he was taking it in. When her color came back, which took perhaps 20 minutes, she reached inside her jacket, the canvas one, which she had not taken off, wearing his wool coat over it like a second skin, and produced a folded envelope, soft with handling, sealed, but clearly not for the first time. She held it out to him. He took it. The handwriting on the outside was Elias's, the wide, deliberate letters of a man who had learned to write in a schoolhouse and had never lost the careful quality of it. It said, For Cal Greer when the time comes. Cal looked at the envelope for a moment. He looked at the woman. "What's your name?" he said. "Zoo." "Ah," she said. "Han-Sua." "Your man, Elias. He was a friend to my father in the years before my father died. He wrote to me. He said if I ever found myself in a corner with no good exit, I should come to Flint Creek and show this letter to the man who ran it." "That was 2 years ago," Cal said, "when Elias was still here." "Yes," she said. "I came now." He opened the letter. The thing about a dead man's handwriting is that it carries the voice more precisely than you expect. He could hear Elias in every clause, the measured pauses, the directness that looked blunt until you realized it was actually careful. The letter said in its entirety, "Cal, if you are reading this, then I am gone and you have been alone too long. The woman who brings this letter to you is Han-Su. Her father, Jong-Soo Han, was the best man I knew outside of yourself. She is skilled and serious, and she does not need saving, but she may need ground to stand on, which is a different thing. She has nowhere fixed to go. Flint Creek has a cook's position in a spare room off the kitchen and a man running it who forgets to eat when he is thinking too hard. I am asking you to offer her the position and the room. I am also asking you to pay attention. That is all I am asking. Pay attention. The rest will follow, or it will not. Either way, you will have done right. I trust you to know what I mean." Cal read the letter twice. Outside, the wind pushed against the window glass with the low, steady note of a thing that has made up its mind. "He did not tell you to come to me as charity," Cal said. "No," she said. "He told me to come to you for work." "Did he tell you what kind of work?" "He said you had a cook's position." "I have been cooking for myself," Cal said. "I can see that," she said. Her eyes went briefly to the pot of cold beans on the table and came back. "It was just accurate. I have a room off the kitchen," he said. "It's small, has a window. I do not need a large room. The position pays $20 a month and found," he said. "Board and fuel included. That is fair," she said. "Before you say yes," Cal said, "I want to say that there are reasons I might have said no. I live alone, and I have had reasons to be careful about changing that. I am not saying yes out of pity or out of obligation to Elias, though I owed him plenty. I am saying yes because the work is real and you are clearly able, and because Elias knew things before the rest of us got there, and I learned a long time ago not to argue with his judgment." The fire between them was steady and warm, and the wind was still pressing at the glass. "He said you would say something like that," she said. "Something like what?" "He said you would make sure it was not charity before you agreed to it. He said you were particular about things being what they were named." Cal folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and set it on the mantel, which was where important things in that house had always lived. "All right," he said. "There are 2 hands on this operation, Dex and Prentice. You will meet them in the morning. The kitchen is through there. The room is off the kitchen south side. There is a latch on the door." "Thank you," she said. Quote, "Elias was thanked when he thought of it," Cal said. "Not now." That was the first night, the 9th of January, and it was also the first entry in what would become for Cal Greer a kind of internal ledger he kept without paper, counting the days and the small events that accumulated inside them, because he had not had anything worth counting in 3 years. Day 2, he watched her assess the kitchen with the systematic efficiency of a person who has worked seriously in confined spaces, before noting what was where, what was missing, what was placed incorrectly, and he watched her rearrange things without comment and without apology. Because the rearrangement made obvious sense, and she was not the kind of woman who apologized for things that made sense. Dex took one look at her at breakfast and said nothing, which from Dex was a form of respect. Prentice said too much, which was his nature, and she answered him with short, patient replies, and let him run himself out, which was the only correct management of Prentice. By day 4, she had the kitchen running at a level it had not reached while Cal was minding it himself, which was to say, meals appeared at consistent hours and contained vegetables, which had been an irregular feature of the previous arrangement. She had found the dry stores in the back pantry and done a quiet inventory, and said to Cal at supper on day 4, "You are short on salt pork, and you will run out of cornmeal before March. I know," he said. "Do you have account with the Maris Supply in town?" "I do." "Then when the storm breaks, I can go in and correct it." "Dex goes in for supply," Cal said. She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. "I can also go," she said. He thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "Fair enough." That was most of their conversations in the first 2 weeks. Short, practical. The silences between them were guarded, still, the kind of silence that is not comfortable but is not hostile either, more like two creatures occupying the same territory and working out the rules of it without quite talking about the rules. Cal noticed things because he was a noticing person who had been left with no one to notice for 3 years, and the attention had nowhere to go. He noticed that she rose before the house was fully light and was quiet about it, that she mended things without being asked, a chair rung, a hinge, a cracked bucket handle sealed with pine pitch, and set them back without comment, as if the mending were simply part of seeing the place. He noticed she went outside in the evenings, even when the cold was serious, standing on the south-facing porch for some minutes, looking out at the basin, and he did not know what she was looking at, and he did not ask. He would count to the answer of that, eventually, but not yet. The thing Elias had said, "Pay attention," had a refrain to it, and Cal found the refrain presenting itself at odd moments in the 2nd and 3rd weeks. In the barn at 3 in the morning, with the lantern making a small island of warmth in the cold dark. Pay attention. As if attention were itself a form of action, which he was beginning to suspect it was. A life repaired with attention is stronger than a life never broken. He had read something like this somewhere, or perhaps Elias had said it, or perhaps he had thought it himself, and forgotten where it came from, but it settled in him during those weeks as its own true thing. On the 17th of January, a Tuesday, which Cal marked because it was the first morning since her arrival that he had slept past 4, he came into the kitchen to find her at the table with a piece of paper, making marks on the paper with the careful precision of a person doing something that requires the whole of their focus. He stopped in the doorway. She had not heard him. He watched her for perhaps 30 seconds, which was enough to see that she was drawing the view through the kitchen window. The ridge line and the snow and the bare cottonwoods along the creek, with a spare, accurate line that captured the weight of the winter light better than he could have said it in words. He must have made a sound because she looked up. She did not cover the paper or apologize. My father kept a record of every place he lived, she said, in drawings. He said, if you look carefully enough at a place to draw it, you have understood something about it that you cannot get any other way. Cal got himself a cup of coffee and sat across the table and looked at the drawing. It was attentive. There was a difference. You could see the ridge better from the south porch, he said. I know, she said, but the morning light comes through this window. He drank his coffee and she drew, and the fire in the cook stove made its steady sound, and that was the 17th of January, which was also when the silence between them began to change its quality, though neither of them said so. In the evenings of the 3rd and 4th weeks, a ritual settled between them that neither had proposed. After supper, when Dex and Prentice had gone to the bunkhouse and the kitchen was cleaned, they sat on either side of the fireplace with coffee, sometimes talking and sometimes not. The talking, when it came, was in increments. She told him about her father, who had come from Korea to the Pacific coast as a young man, had worked the fisheries, the lumber camps, the long, uncertain chain of jobs that a man works when no institution is willing to name him a full person, until he found his way to the interior and met Elias Marsh on a road crew, and the two of them had recognized in each other a shared quality of character that was, as she put it. Cal listened. He did not fill her pauses with commentary, which she noticed because most people filled pauses with commentary. She asked him about Ruth on the 22nd day. She asked carefully, the way you approach a fence you are not sure will hold your weight, tentatively, testing each step, he told her. Not everything, not the bottomless specific grief of it, but the shape of it. Who Ruth was, what she was like, how the land had been theirs, together, and then very suddenly only his. He said Ruth had been funny in the dry, unexpected way of people who are also serious, that she had known every acre of this property by a private name she had invented for it, that he still sometimes used her names for the fields and the draws when he was alone and did not realize. My father had names for things too, Sue said. Different from the map names. He said the map names were for getting somewhere. The personal names were for knowing you had arrived. Cal was quiet for a while. Then he said, Ruth would have liked that. Tell me one, she said. One of the names. He looked into the fire for a moment. The south pasture she called the long room, he said. She said it felt like a room in a house you could see the whole sky from. Sue set her cup down. That is exactly what it is, she said. And the silence after that was of a different order than the silences that had come before. By the 31st day, the 1st of February, the storm had broken and the temperature had come up enough to make the world feel possible again. And Cal went into Maris Supply with Dex, and while he was there, a man named Fenton Ord, who ran the dry goods adjacent to the supply, came out from behind his counter to speak to him. Which was unusual because Ord was not the social kind. You ought to know something, Ord said, keeping his voice below the counter noise of the store. Harlan Cade is making a claim on Elias Marsh's old timber parcel up on the north slope of your property. He says there's a note outstanding from Marsh to his father, unpaid at the time of death, and that the note gives Cade an interest in the timber rights. Cal looked at Ord for a moment. He knew Harlan Cade. Everyone in the basin knew Harlan Cade, who was a landman of the worst variety. Not a cattleman, not a farmer, not a person who wanted the land for anything the land was actually for, but a man who wanted the value represented by the land and was willing to use whatever instrument came to hand to extract it. He owned 3 other parcels in the basin acquired through similar mechanisms, and he had a man named Fielder in the county recorder's office who had a flexible relationship with documentation. "How current is this?" Cal said. "He was in here last week asking after your operation. Specifically, who was on the property." "I did not volunteer anything." "I appreciate that. He's got 2 men riding with him these days," Ord said. "Just so you know." Cal thanked him and went back to loading the wagon and said nothing to Dex. He did the arithmetic on the drive home. The North Slope timber was 60 acres of mature ponderosa that Elias had always said was the capital of the place. Slow growing, serious, the kind of resource you did not touch unless you had to. If Cade took a timber interest in it, he could harvest it inside a year and leave the slope bare, and Cal would lose the watershed protection for the whole upper pasture. It was not a small threat. It was the kind of threat designed to look like a legal dispute while actually being a taking. He told Sua that evening. She listened with her hands around her cup and her eyes level, and she did not catastrophize it, which he was grateful for. "Does the note exist?" she said. "I don't know," Cal said. "Elias kept clean book. I have all his papers in the desk in the office. I've never found any mention of a debt to the Cade family." "Then the books are where we start," she said. They spent that evening at the desk together going through Elias's ledgers and correspondence files. 3 years' worth, Cal reading and Sua keeping a separate list of every transaction, mentioned every name, every date. At the end of 2 hours they had found no note, no reference to a Cade, no transaction of any kind, with that name or any name proximate to it. What they had found, in a folder Elias had labeled simply "held," was a letter from an attorney in the county seat named Genevieve Pryor, dated 14 months ago, which said that in the event of a challenge to the Flint Creek property rights, Elias had filed a full recorded deed with her office, along with a sworn affidavit of no encumbrances at the time of transfer to Cal Greer. Elias had known. He had not been certain it would be Cade, but he had known the land would be tested eventually, and he had put in place the instrument to protect it. "He looked further ahead than we do," Cal said. "He did," Sua said. She was looking at the letter. He was that kind of person. He trusted the living to catch up. Cal wrote to Pryor that night and sent the letter to town with Prentice the next morning. The following week, on a Wednesday of early February, Harlan Cade came to Flint Creek. He came with 2 men, both of them the employed kind of large, and he came in the early afternoon when the light was flat and the snow was crusted hard enough to creak under a horse's hoof. Cal heard the horses from the barn and came out with his rifle in the crook of his arm, the casual carry of a man who is not threatening anyone in particular. Cade was perhaps 55, well-fed in the way of men who eat at other people's expense, and he wore the kind of clothes that were intended to suggest authority without quite saying so. He had a pleasant voice and knew how to arrange his face into a reasonable expression. "Mr. Greer," he said, "I have come on a matter of an outstanding debt." "I've heard about the matter," Cal said. I have no record of any such debt in Elias Marsh's papers, which I have in full. The note was held privately, Cade said. My father was a discreet man. I'm sure he was, Cal said. But a private note still leaves an impression on the borrower's accounts, and Elias kept careful books. There's no impression of any Cade in them anywhere. Cade's pleasant expression did not change, but something behind it did. You might want to take some time to reconsider, he said. The timber on that north slope represents a significant asset. There are ways this can be arranged that leave everyone well. I'm not looking for an arrangement, Cal said. I'm looking for documentation, which you don't appear to have. During this exchange, Suah had come out of the house and was standing on the porch. She had the old short rifle that Elias had kept above the kitchen door, and she was holding it in the same casual way Cal held his, not aimed, not presented, simply present. One of Cade's men looked at her and looked away. Cade himself did not look at her directly, which Cal noted. You have 30 days, Cade said pleasantly. I would use them to think. I'll use them to talk to my attorney, Cal said. Call. Cade turned his horse and the two men turned with him, and they rode out the way they had come, and the sound of the hooves on the crusted snow diminished, and then was gone. Cal looked at Suah on the porch. She looked at him. He has the deed office man, Cal said. Yes, she said, but you have the attorney with the prior recording, which he doesn't know about yet? No, she said. He doesn't. She went back inside. Cor stood in the snow for another minute, looking at where the riders had gone, and he was not afraid, or rather, he was a kind of afraid that operates alongside competence and does not hinder it. He took it seriously. He went back to work. The letter from Genevieve Pryor arrived 10 days later, on the 18th of February, and it said that the prior recorded deed was intact and unambiguous, that the sworn no encumbrance affidavit was attached to it, and that she had additionally, as a precaution, sent a copy of both documents to the Territorial Land Office with a cover letter describing the nature of the anticipated challenge. She said she had dealt with Cade's kind before, and that documentation filed in advance was a considerably more powerful instrument, the documentation filed in response. She said she was available to appear in person if it came to a legal proceeding, and that her fee for any appearance would be in addition to the filing fee already noted. Cal read this letter at the table, and Suah put a cup of coffee at his elbow and went back to the stove. She says we are in good shape, Cal said. I thought we would be, Suah said. On what basis? On the basis that Elias was meticulous, and he had 30 years to think about what this land might need protecting from, she said. He was not the kind of man who left a door open. Cal folded the letter. He put it on the mantel with the other one. That night, he sat by the fire and did not go to bed when he should have, and he was aware of something that was taking shape in him slowly, and was not grief, and was not obligation, and was not the functional satisfaction of the work, though it was in the neighborhood of all three. It was something more like the feeling of a thing arriving that you had not known you were waiting for, and had not allowed yourself to look at, even when it was in front of you, because looking at it directly would mean deciding what to do about it. And that was frightening in a way the threat of Harlan Cade was not. A life repaired with attention is stronger than a life never broken. He turned the refrain in his mind. Elias had said, Pay attention. He had been paying attention for 47 days now, and here was what he had attended to. A woman who mended things quietly and said what she meant, and stood on a porch with a rifle, not out of bravado, but out of the simple arithmetic of a situation that required it. A woman who drew the light through the kitchen window because her father had taught her that looking carefully at a place was how you understood it. A woman who asked about Ruth with the right kind of care and did not need him to minimize his grief, to make her comfortable. A woman who had walked 9 miles in a killing January cold and knocked on 8 doors and been turned away from all of them, and had arrived at his door not broken, but simply cold, because there is a difference between a person who has been defeated. He had noticed all of this. Elias had told him to notice. And now he was going to have to decide what to do with the noticing, and whether that decision was about obligation or about something else entirely. He decided it was about something else entirely. That took him most of one evening. The next morning was the 21st of February, which was a Sunday, and Dex and Prentice had gone to town for the day, as they sometimes did on Sundays, and the house was quiet in the particular way of a house with 2 people in it who were aware of each other's presence. Sue was on the south-facing porch with her paper and charcoal, drawing the long room from above, the south pasture Ruth had named, and Cal came out and stood beside her and looked at the drawing, and then looked at the pasture. "There is something I want to say," he said, "and I want to say it plainly, so there is no misunderstanding in it." She did not put down the charcoal, but she held it still. "Elias brought you here for a job," Cal said, "and the job is real, and I would not undo that or make it into something it is not. But I have been paying attention, the way he asked me to, and what I have found by doing that is that I want you to stay, not as the cook, not as the person in the room off the kitchen, as the person who is the other half of this place, if that is something you would consider. I am not asking you to fill any other person's place, because you are not another person, you are yourself, and this place is large enough to be a new thing, if you wanted it to be one." He stopped. He was not a man who talked at length, and that had been at length. Sue looked at the south pasture. She looked at the drawing. She looked at him. "I stayed because the place was what I had been looking for without knowing. I was looking for something I think I knew inside of the first 2 weeks. But knowing a thing and being ready to name it are not the same distance apart." "I know that," Cal said. "If I stay," she said, "I keep my name. I would not have it any other way," he said. "And I keep the room drawing," she said. "The one on the paper." She looked at him for another moment in the cold, clear February air, with the light on the snow of the long room below them, going blue in the early morning. And she said, yes, one word. He had expected no more from her, and needed no more. They rode into the county seat the following week, on the 1st of March, a Thursday, and sat across the desk from Genevieve Pryor, who turned out to be a small, sharp-eyed woman of perhaps 60 who had handled property law in the Basin country for 30 years and had seen all the variations of what people tried to do to each other in the name of land. And she listened to what they needed, which was a legal marriage filed with the county and added to the deed record. And she looked at them both for a moment and said, "All right." in the tone of a person who finds the request both practical and in some way she did not articulate. Correct. The filing took 40 minutes. Pryor charged them her standard fee for the marriage and deed amendment, which was $12, and shook their hands and said to Cal, "Elias Marsh was a client of mine for 20 years. He had good judgment about people." "He did," Cal said. She looked at Sua. "He told me about you," she said. "A year before he died, he said if a woman named Han Sua came to this basin, I was to be useful to her." Sue was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He looked further ahead than we do. He always did," Pryor said. They were back at Flint Creek by evening, and Dex had made supper, badly, because Dex's cooking was a kind of punishment administered without malice, and Prentice had set the table with a care that was slightly too ceremonious for the occasion. Dex said nothing during supper, which was his way. After supper he shook Cal's hand and nodded at Sua and went back to the bunkhouse. And that was Dex's version of celebration, which they accepted in the spirit intended. Harlan Cade came back in the second week of March, the 12th, and this time he came with 4 men and the compromised records official from the county deed office, a pale, uncomfortable man named Rawls, who looked like a person doing a thing he had been told to do and had not been able to think of a reason not to do it except cowardice, which was reason enough, but not the kind that holds. Cal met them at the gate, which was a quarter-mile from the house, and he had with him Dex and Prentice and a copy of Pryor's file deed and the Territorial Land Office confirmation she had sent him, which had arrived in the last week of February. He gave the Territorial confirmation to Rawls, first because Rawls was the instrument Cade intended to use, and a confirmation from the Territory, rather than the county, was above Rawls's ability to contradict. His color changed. Cade looked at Rawls. Then he looked at Cal. Cal said, "The Pryor deed and no encumbrance affidavit were filed 14 months ago. The Territorial office—" "I have the receipt here if you want to see it." "Whatever document you have showing a note from Elias Marsh, I would encourage you to look at it very carefully before you file it anywhere, because filing a fabricated instrument with the Territorial office is a different order of problem." He said this without heat, the way you say things that are simply true. Cade's pleasant expression was entirely gone now. He looked at the men with him, and at Rawls, and at the document in Rawls's hands, and he made the calculation that a man of his type makes, which is always fundamentally about cost and risk, and the cost had just gone significantly up, and the risk had become acute. He did not say anything. He turned his horse. The 4 men turned. Rawls, looking profoundly relieved, folded the Territorial confirmation and handed it back to Cal and turned his horse and rode out last, which told Cal that Rawls had been looking for an exit from this arrangement since the beginning and had now found one that did not require him to do anything further except leave. Prentice said, when they were gone, "That's it." "That's it," Cal said. "I thought there'd be more to it than that." "Most things aren't as dramatic as you'd like them to be," Cal said. "That is usually a sign things went right." Prentice thought about this for a moment. "I suppose," he said, with the tone of someone who was not entirely convinced. Dex said nothing, which meant he agreed with Cal. Spring came to Flint Creek the way it always did on the plateau, not all at once, but in persuasions. First, the light changed its angle, acquiring a quality of intention it had lacked since November. And then the snow on the south faces began to pull back uphill, and then the creek came up with meltwater and ran loud for 2 weeks. And then the grass appeared in the low places, tentative and absolutely certain at once. The way new things are when they are also very old. Sue-ah began a series of drawings she called The Record of the Place, which was what her father had kept, and she worked through the seasons, keeping it the East Ridge at different lights, the long room in mud season, the barn and its good strong lines, the faces of the cattle, the particular way the light left the rock of the north slope in the late afternoon. Cal watched her work sometimes and said nothing, which was the correct response, and which she acknowledged with a small nod that meant she knew he was there and was not minding it. She taught him a word in Korean, one at a time, over the spring evenings, and he repeated them with the careful inaccuracy of a man whose mouth was trained on different sounds, and she corrected him with the patience of a teacher, because he had learned from her example that trying again was not a weakness, but simply what you did with a skill you were still building. He told her more of Ruth's names for things. She told him the place accumulated a private language built from 3 sources, which seemed right to Cal in a way he could not have articulated, but which Elias, he suspected, would have recognized immediately. A life repaired with attention is stronger than a life never broken. He thought about this on an evening in late April, when they were sitting on the south porch as the last light left the long room below, the whole basin going from gold to blue to that deep translucent gray that is the last color before dark. And he was aware that the silence between them was now the kind of silence that is a form of presence rather than an absence, the kind that contains something rather than waiting for something, and that this had happened not in one moment, but across 100 small moments of honest work and attention, each one a single stitch in something that was becoming, gradually and without announcement, a whole. Sue-ah was drawing the light, leaving the basin. He was watching her draw it. The coffee between them was warm. The cattle in the long room were visible as dark shapes in the last light, moving slowly in the way of cattle that are content, which is one of the more quietly reassuring sights available to a person who runs cattle for a living. "Tell me one thing you didn't know when you came here," he said. She considered the basin for a moment, the charcoal still in her hand. "I didn't know that a quiet place could be full," she said. "I thought quiet meant empty." "What changed it?" "Attention," she said. "Somebody paying attention to the same things you're paying attention to." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Elias knew that." "He knew a great deal," she said. "He knew us," Cal said. Before we knew each other, she looked at him. The last light was in her eyes, and on the drawing, and on the snow that was still on the high ridge above them, and the basin was going blue below, and the cattle were quiet, and the spring was coming into the world, the way spring always comes. "He did," she said. "And that was enough. That was more than enough." That was the full and complete arithmetic of a life that had been narrowed for 3 years, and was now, by the most unexpected set of hands, returned to its right dimensions. Not replaced, not erased, not traded for something new, but enlarged again, until it fit a person who had been making himself smaller than he was. He had given her his coat in January, the 9th day of the month, 47 days before he asked her to stay, and 80-some days before the spring settled in for good. She had given him back the full size of his life by April. The accounts, as far as Cal Greer was ever able to work them out, did not balance in any direction except the one that mattered, which was forward. A life repaired with attention is stronger than a life never broken. This is what he would have told you if you had asked him on that April evening with the light going blue on the long room and the spring asserting itself in the creek below, and the record of the place accumulating, page by page, on the kitchen table. He would have said it simply the way Elias would have said it, without decoration, because the truth of it did not require any. He had paid attention. The rest had followed.